Okay, hello folks. Welcome. It's nice to have everyone here for the Paperpot webinar. I'm Ben Hartman, and we are at Clay Bottom Farm. And our farmer's in the background here. And I want to thank a couple people behind the scenes. Nicole Craig and Adiana Perez Diener are going to be walking around with cameras and moving trays around. So it's a real team effort here, but I'm glad everyone was able to make it. I'm really excited about this webinar because I'm excited about paper pots. We use them pretty intensely on our farm. Most crops are on our farm go through the paper pot system. I have 17 years of growing experience here at Clay Bottom Farm. We're a hyper-local farm. All of our food sells within a mile and a half of our farm. And we farm on just 1/3 of an acre, but it's a very intensely used one third of an acre. And without paper pots, I don't think we could have made it happen. And I'm also the author of The Lean Farm. There are 3 books in that series, and I write pretty extensive about paper pots in those books. So you can check those out for more resources. I'm going to jump onto a PowerPoint quick and show you some history of the paper pot and some of the reasons that we like to use it. And then we're actually going to go out to the greenhouse and we'll see the tool in action. So I want to say thanks to Nitten, Paperpot Japan, who created this system. They're sponsoring this workshop, so that's at no cost to you. And with support from Small Farm Works and John Henriksen. My friends at Nitten are shown here with John Henriksen on our farm, Ozawa-san, Shinano-san, John Henriksen. Thank you very much. It's a real team effort to make this presentation available to you. And this month, the Lean Market Growing Masterclass is 40% off. And check out more resources at these websites down below. But go to claybottomfarm.com for a lot more free resources and 40% off of my masterclass. As an overhead view of Clay Bottom Farm, and you can see our beds in production. Most of what you see here was put in with paper pots. We can really fill the farm up fairly quickly in a day or two with this paper pot method. So what are paper pots? They are paper chains. You open up the chains when you transplant and it spaces out your crop. There's this orange colored tool here we're going to use in a minute that perfectly spaces your crops and allows you to get transplants in very efficiently and at low cost with a very simple to use tool. Wanted to show you some of my favorite crops to do with the paper pot system. These are Hakurei turnips, beets and turnips, these root crops. They grow really well together actually as clusters where you plant a clump of 4 to 6 seeds in one paper chain and they grow out away from one another. And we found that we get nice sizes, nice consistent sizes with the roots, and they do well with that system. Green onions would be one of my favorite paper pot crops because of spacing. We can achieve a perfect 2-inch spacing on these. And there's beets. You can grow beets in clusters, or you can singulate your beets if you want really uniform size. Here it looks like 2-inch, 4-inch is probably my favorite spacing on beets. I grow herbs, basil, and it's seen here with 6-inch paper pot chains. And we cluster seed the basil too, so there's 3 to 4 seeds in each paper chain. And then head lettuce. This is multi-cut head lettuce, the Solanova types. Do super well with the chains, and that's probably the crop that we use the most with the paper pot system. What's fun with this is that you can play with your seasons, and here we're getting green beans by early May, and the reason is by transplanting we can achieve good germination. If we had direct seeded beans in late March or April, we would not have got good germination, but by transplanting we can germinate in the paper chains and then get good germination out in the field. One crop that hasn't worked for us is carrots. We still direct seed carrots. You can see the picture here of direct-seeded carrots are much more uniform in size than the transplanted carrots, and the yield was higher too with the direct-seeded carrots. So a short history of these paper pot system is it goes all the way back to 1961. The first chain pots for sugar beets were developed by Nippon Sugar Beet Manufacturing in Hokkaido, Japan. And then the 1992, the transplanter, the Paperpot Transplanting system was launched. And in 2005, John Henriksen, shown with his family here, was spent a year in Obihiro, Japan. And John saw some farmers transplanting using that tool, and a bunch of light bulbs went off in his head and said, we've got to get this tool over to the US, make it available here. And so John started to work with Nitten to make that tool available here. And John's company is Small Farm Works, where you can purchase all the supplies that you're going to see me showing here. So Paperpot is not perfect for every farm in every situation. And so I do want to talk about some pros and cons with the tool. So big advantage, number one, you probably already picked up on this, it's much less work. We save a lot of time with the system. So the economics really come out for me on our farm. It would take transplant about 264 plugs by hand. It takes me, I'm not the world's fastest transplanter, but it would take me about an hour to do. To transplant that many plants using Paperpot chains, there are 264 little cells in each of these chains. It takes just 10 minutes. And $20, if you're going to pay $20 an hour, that comes to about $4 an hour compared to 20. So a big savings in that regard. And we estimate we're saving at least 125 hours every year on our farm with the tool. Another advantage is that there's less waste because there's controlled germination. When you direct seed a crop, you're leaving a lot up to chance. And with the wind could dry out your crop. You could plant and then there's no rain for 2 weeks. You can, all kinds of reasons to get poor germination. With paper potting, we found we can achieve nearly 100% germination, and we can transplant just about everything that we would direct seed, but we have better germination, so we're saving money on seeds. Some few other advantages. It's a simple tool. There's no electric motor, no engines, no maintenance here. No fossil fuels that you're using, and it's easy to use. We found most people can be trained to use the tool in a half an hour to an hour, just a few trays, and they're ready to go. There is a learning curve, which is one of the limitations. Another one is that it can leave bits of paper in the field. It does decompose faster in compost, so if you have soils that are moist and good carbon, and there's decompositional activity in the soils, then we found the paper chains do decompose within a season. But it can be frustrating to see the bits of paper. The system it does have a cost. The chains are a few dollars each, and so every time you seed it, compared to transplanting, you are investing a bit more in the chain. It's not suitable, like I'd said, for all crops. We don't use it for carrots, but also don't use it for peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, the widely spaced out crops. And it doesn't work well in all soils. The moisture has to be just right, and we'll get into that in a minute. And soils that are overly chunky or overly sandy might have some problems. We'll talk about some of that when we get to the greenhouse. And like I said, there's a bit of a learning curve, but I think it's doable. And if you have figured out how to log into Zoom here, then you've got the skill set I think is required to make it happen with paper pots. Okay, so how we use paper pots on our farm is that I have designed the farm to accommodate the system. So our beds are 70 feet in length, and we can cut those in half to 35 feet in length. And one of these 70-foot beds accommodates 2 chains, or cut in half, we would accommodate 1 chain, 1 6-inch paper pot chain. So there's no waste. So that's something to think about as you're laying out your farm. Think about the length of the chains, and that information is on Small Farm Works website. Length of the chains, and you might want to size your beds accordingly. You might want to take a screenshot of this one here. This is the table that we use from our top crops, and we're going to transplant most of these in a minute here in the greenhouse. And this is a larger table of a wider range of crops that we have used and grown with the Paperpot system here. So you might want to grab a screenshot of this, and we are going to make the video of this available to you shortly, in a day or two. And here's a list of places where you can purchase Paperpot supplies. It's a partial list. There are now many places selling the tool. It's widely available in North America. Okay, thanks. I'm going to do a transition here, and Nicole's going to start filming, and I'm going to actually start doing a little bit of paper potting so you can see what the tool looks like in action. And I should say too that I welcome questions, and we have a way that Nicole will be able to see your questions, and she'll shout them out at me. So this is an informal 1 hour that we have. I want it to be as useful to you as possible, so please feel free to interrupt. And this the genius of the system really comes down to these chains. And you can see there are 264 cells in here. They ship these chains compressed. You can buy chains of varying widths. And I'm excited to introduce tonight a new width of chain. The typical chain is 3 centimeters or 2-inch. There's 4-inch, 6-inch, and now there is a 10-inch option available. And we're going to transplant some of those tonight. So now there's a 10-inch chain that you can use on your farm. So what happens is we're going to spread out this chain over a frame. Okay, question is, what are these paper pots made of? So what it looks like is a craft paper material, like brown paper grocery sacks. And it is a proprietary recipe. I don't know exactly what's in them, but it is certified organic. It has passed organic certification. And so you're safe to use it on your organic farms in Canada and the US. Okay, so next we're going to slip this chain into a support tray. And I want you to notice there are lots of little holes in the bottom of that support tray, and that's for air pruning of the roots. So if you have this on a mesh table that air can get underneath, then you're not going to have a problem of roots tangling and growing into one another inside of here. Very handy feature, and also it's handy for bottom watering. You can purchase bottom watering trays that fit this system here, and then you don't have to water from overhead. You can simply fill the boot tray that you've put underneath there. You can go to Target or wherever and get boot trays too, that you can sit these in and water them from underneath, which is my preferred way to water with this system. Okay, so once this chain is spread out, we simply fill it with potting mix, and which I've done here, just as you would a standard plastic plug flat. And then what you're going to want to do is go ahead and level it off so that you can see the hexagonal pattern that's left behind. The reason you want to be able to see it is because next we're going to take a dibbling tool, and this dibble board here is going to poke 264 little holes inside of our chain. Now my kids were playing around with it and they broke one of these little pegs. And so I have the particular waste of having to poke one hole every time that I use the tool, but that's fine. Okay.
Canada has different organic rules, and they're not allowed on organic farms in Canada.
Okay, so a clarification, John Henriksen is clarifying a mistake I made, which is to say that in can they're certified organic in the U.S., but not in Canada. They're still working on that process. So here I have a bag of seeds. In this case, we're going to do spinach. And I'm going to put it in a 2-plate gravity seeder. And you'll note that there are rather large holes on the bottom and then smaller holes on the top. There are different plates, different millimeter diameter holes that you can use with this system depending on the size of seeds that you have. And with spinach, I actually want to cluster seed spinach. I sort of want to have 4 or 6 seeds per hole. But in this case, for demonstration, there's about 1 seed in each hole here. And what I'm going to do is put this over top and then simply press the two plates line up with one another. I'll back this off here and you can see that in a matter of seconds, we've seeded 264 cells. Okay, so like I said, I want to cluster seed spinach, so I'm going to repeat that process a couple of times so you can see how that works.
Experimented with corn.
Have I experimented with corn? That's a great question. And the answer is no, I haven't, but only because I don't actually grow a lot of sweet corn just for family use. And for a small patch, I'm not sure it'd be worth it. However, if I had 10 acres of corn to put in, I would probably direct seed it. And so, but there is a probably a space in the middle, maybe at a scale of half an acre or to 2 acres or so, where I think it would be interesting to see if you could transplant the corn. And an advantage being that you could be 3, 4 weeks ahead of your competition by transplanting corn.
Do you thin the beets to one seedling per paper pot or leave them in clusters?
So the beets, I like to actually thin those to 1 seedling. And I actually do that while it's in the tray here, maybe after 3 weeks of growth. And you can kind of go along and prick them out. And I'm just sort of particular. I like to have larger size uniform beets. You totally don't have to. You can transplant. And of course, a beet seed is actually a cluster of 4 to 6 seeds. And so if you put 1 beet seed in each cell here, you'll get a cluster of beets growing away from one another. With a 6-inch chain, I found that that's really magic. You can get lots of beets. They won't be quite as uniform, obviously, cluster growing, but that's a great way to grow lots of beets. They're a bit tricky to transplant, of course. Beets don't like the heat. They don't like, you got to be careful when you're transplanting to do it in cool evening. Look for a cool window to put them in. But I've done beets successfully with this system for a number of years.
Several more questions.
Sure. Yep. Go ahead.
Straight rows.
Okay. So the question is, what do I use to mark the rows? And to be honest, what I'm doing now is just use a shovel and I mark the paths. And when we get to the greenhouse, I'll show you how I do that bed preparation. I wanted to note that to cover these seeds, I simply used my hand and just kind of brushed over top here. And that's really sufficient. You can use vermiculite too. We have a fine vermiculite we'll sometimes use, but really just quick brush with the hand is usually sufficient. And then I'll do an overhead watering here, make sure the seeds are good and soaked, and then go ahead and germinate them. I like to use I have a chamber, germination chamber, and I wrote about how to build one in my books, and it's on the masterclass course too, but it's basically an upright refrigeration unit with a crock pot in it. And we'll get great, you can set the temperature, whatever you want, and get optimum germination. In late summer, going into winter, all the transplants were put in here. I grew them on my porch, actually. And I did an Instapost a couple days ago. You can see I grew them on wet cement on our porch to keep them cool. But that's really becoming more of a challenge. We're getting hotter and hotter afternoons this time of year. But it's important to keep these winter crops cool if you want to have good success with them throughout the winter.
Are pelleted seeds always necessary?
Are pelleted seeds always necessary? No. In fact, this seaside spinach that I just put in here was not pelleted.
You ever tried deep cell paper pot?
I have not done the deep cell paper chains, and I would like to try them, and I'd like to see how they'd work. I think that especially for crops that are in the ground longer, deeper cells could be, um, I'm sorry, crops that are in the paper chains for longer. I think that would help give a bit more room for the roots.
So somebody thought you had moved to all 6-inch chains. Are you using different sizes? Wondering why, if so.
So we have gravitated to growing just about everything in 6-inch chains. The charts I gave you show a variety of chain sizes. I moved to 6-inch chains just because we're on a mission to simplify everything on our farm, and really everything pretty well works in the 6-inch. I do find that spinach maybe wants a closer spacing, so we're going with 2-inch on spinach. And now that these 10-inch chains have come out, we're gonna try kale, bok choys, some of those crops, which I've not done with paper pots, but with that wider spacing, we'll be able to.
3 questions left. What's the best soil
Okay.
consistency depth so the paper chain's fully buried?
Okay, so the depth of the soil is a really good question. We're gonna actually gravitate to the greenhouse and start putting some plants in. So remind me of that question if I don't get to it.
Okay.
So we're gonna walk. You can go ahead and say the next
How
question.
many
We're gonna walk
trays
to the
do you
greenhouse.
want?
So how many trays? So it depends on the season, but generally speaking, I'm putting in between 4 and 6 trays a week during my heavier planting times. So spring and then late summer. And you can see several trays kind of laid out here that where we're going to put in. But I found that that's a good pace for us on the farm to keep our work pretty well even. We have two part-time staff, and my wife and I, and so it's really a really slim crew, and we're part-time farming pretty well, working only 3.5 days a week, and so that's the good amount for us.
Don says one downside to the deeper chain pots is there's even more paper to decompose. Most crops do better or fine in the shallow paper pot.
So John is making the note that most crops actually do fine in the shallow paper chains, and the downside with the deeper chains is they are going to have slower decomposition. So how's our reception here in the greenhouse? Okay, we're hoping the Wi-Fi is gonna reach all the way out to the middle of the greenhouse.
Paper chain.
The long carrots, we direct seed those, and the key is the soil should be very moist and loose, and that should be moist when you put the seeds in. Those seeds need a good 2 weeks for germination, and then keep the ground moist for just about the entire growing season. Because if the ground dries up, then the carrots stop growing. So it's really that's and get your spacing proper too on that. So we don't thin ours, but we do space them out we use a Jang seeder and make sure there's speeds going about every 1/2 inch to an inch. I wonder if you would be able to grab the rake, the bed preparation rake. Someone had a question about how bed preparation happens here. Oh, I'm sorry, it's right behind us here. Okay, so the lean farmer misplaced the tool. You witnessed it. So what I'm going to show you is how we do bed preparation. And someone asked how we keep our rows straight. And last week, well, actually earlier this week, we pulled tomatoes out of here. And so the process was pulling out the tomatoes. We pulled up a landscaping fabric that was here. And then I have a wheel hoe, an electric wheel hoe called an e-ox. And we use 5 shank cultivator tines on that e-ox just to help fluff the soil a bit. It's not tilling, it's not inverting the layers of the soil, but it is going to loosen it enough because we were walking on that soil all summer with harvesting tomatoes. And then what we'll simply do is rake. And we want a fairly smooth surface, not so much for the sake of the transplanting tool, but more it's when it comes time to harvest, we're going to use the greens harvesting tool. So we want the bed to be fairly fairly leveled out before the seeds, before the transplants are going in. Having experienced the chains falling apart in the nursery. No, I haven't, but it should be said that I transplant fairly young. Everything we're putting in here is no more than 4 weeks of age, and some crops I'll transplant as little as 2 weeks old. And really, what I want to see is I call it mouse's ear. But when you see the first true leaf, that's about the size of a mouse's ear on your crop, it's big enough to go through the Paperpot system, and I don't really see advantages to holding crops for a long time, for more than 3 or 4 weeks in these chains, except for onions. You may want those to size up a bit more, and we'll wait 5 or 6 weeks on the onions sometimes. That's a good question. Okay, someone had also asked how loose the soil needs to be before transplanting. And the answer is, in my experience, not very, it doesn't have to be super loose because the tool has a nice furrower underneath it. And I said in advertising this webinar is going to show a new attachment. This is a deep furrow. The standard furrower that comes with this tool is shallower than this. And Nitten sent me a deeper furrower here that we use no-till methods on our farm. And so I found that the deeper furrower attachment, which just takes a couple minutes, you just have to unscrew a couple of bolts on here. It just takes a couple minutes to replace, but we get much better coverage, soil coverage in our transplanting with this tool, with our no-till system. And if you're no-till, and I guess we do use the 5-shank tool from the EOX. Some people would call that tillage, but I consider tillage when you're really inverting the layers of the soil. But anyhow, our soils are not perfect. They certainly have a lot of chunks. You can see a lot of chunks in here, and they can be quite stiff in the field, especially. And just by way of demonstration, let me show you the path here. We've been walking on it. It's very stiff. And I'll go ahead and pull the tool in the path, and you can see that it's fine. That furrower has a sharp tip, and it can really dig into probably not cement, but ground that's pretty firm. Okay, did I get to all the questions? Sure. So I would say the yeah, the depth, it should be, I would say that the path that I just showed you here is firm all the way up to the top.
Is there an advantage to compared to the version from Neversink?
I have not actually used any other tool than this HP10, which I've had for at least 7 growing seasons, and it's the original design. And to be honest, I'm not trying to like oversell it, but I've just had zero maintenance problems and zero performance problems with it in all those years. So I haven't seen a need to upgrade or change it. I do know there are different, not just Neversink, but TerraTech, and others are making their own versions of this tool. Johnny's Seeds has one that looks very similar to me to this original version here, but I can heartily recommend the HP10, and I've not actually used all the versions that are out there. That's one reason I like the HP10 is that this is a lighter weight tool than some of the newer ones that are available. I don't know how heavy it is. I haven't weighed it. John might be able to tell you. But even with a really wet, heavy tray on here, it's not difficult for me, and I'm not a bodybuilder by any stretch. It's not difficult for one person to lift it and move it.
The trace from the soil after harvest?
On our farm, we leave the trays in. Okay. The question, good question. The question is, do we leave the paper chains in or do we remove them? And I like to leave them in and just let them decompose because it's less work. If you're particular about looks and want to get those chains up and out, then you can remove them with a rake and pull them up by hand. So I want to show you how spinach works here. And just by way of demonstration, there was some direct seeded spinach next to it, and you can see it was kind of bit spotty germination, which is to be expected. September, the hot afternoons, I just haven't cracked the code on how to get spinach to germinate, well in heat. However, you can see in the paper chains, it's really thick and we got really good germination. And so my typical practice on fall spinach is plant it using paper chains until maybe November or late October when you can have consistently cooler temps and don't have these afternoons that spike up into the mid 70s, which is just a killer for spinach germination. So here I germinate in the germination chamber in the house at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. About 3 or 4 days, it starts to come up. Then I keep it on wet cement under a porch so it stays cool. And that was about 2.5 weeks ago. And now we're going to go ahead and see how it's going to work here being transplanted. You saw I put a support tray underneath. And then I'm going to pull off this front here. Now this first foot or so, I'm just going to tuck those in by hand just as a way to hold the chain. Optionally, you can put these press wheels in here. We'll see how that works. The first foot or so, it's experimental. So I might be going too deep, not deep enough. We'll see and make adjustments. So it looks okay. I would say I'm plenty on the deep side. And so I'm going to make an adjustment here. I did bury a few, but we're going to shallow it up just a touch and get these guys in. And it really is not taking me much longer than direct seeding. I found I'm glad that happened, but there's probably a rock or something in here. Yeah, sure. A clump that kind of gummed it up. So it's not perfect. And Mariana is going around behind and tucking plants in. This is a good buddy system activity. I have one person on the transplanting tool and someone else going along tucking the plants in. So here we're at the end. You can see I'm just a few feet from the tomatoes here, but the tool is nimble enough. I can still in my run here. And then what I will do is simply come back and go the other direction. I like to keep spinach about 9 inches apart. So that's about the width of my hand here. So I'm just going to double check. And that's going to allow me to get a hoe in here, do any cultivation I might need to do.
Transplant is about 30 to 35 pounds.
Okay. So John Hendrickson chimes in that the transplanter weighs about 30 to 35 pounds. So I wonder, Anna, if you would grab another spinach tray that's back here. So in this case, I'm not averse to stepping right on the bed. And you can see I'm doing so here. The transplanter is going to loosen up the ground where I'm stepping. And well, there we got kind of gummed up at the end here, which does happen sometimes. So that last foot or so, and I should say that you can, if it's too much of an investment to spring for the tool, you can certainly just use the chains. And I have transplanted many chains without the tool, and it's a good place to show you how that happens. But you just create a furrow, use your hand or grab a hoe, and set the chain down in and then tuck in your plants. So I do know home gardeners and others with small spaces, that's a good way to use the tool. Sure. So if you need to make an adjustment on here, you can turn this knob and it will go more shallow or more deep. And I recommend making that adjustment every time you transplant and pull it for 3 feet or so. Do a depth check and then make your adjustment. So we're going to finish out this row of spinach here, and then we're going to move on and do some other crops. So you'll notice that the ground is nice and moist, and that's not by accident. We came in here the last day or two and have been checking the moisture and been watering. I like to have wet transplants going into wet soil. That's my favorite way to transplant, and that's how we've seen the most success. And late afternoon is the best time to do it. So that's partly why we're doing it this time. The sun's going to go down, and nighttime will tuck in the transplants. Okay, so I think we're going to transition to another crop here. We have towering fig trees behind us, just going to pose a bit of a challenge as far as shade is concerned. However, by late October, the leaves usually are dropping, and we'll be able to get some light on these plants going in. But I'm excited to show these new 10-inch chains. And I have bok choy in here and kale, winter boar kale, and joy choy. And this tray here is about 2 weeks, and this tray here is about 3 weeks, 3 weeks old. We're going to try this 2-week tray here. I wonder, Adiana, if you could move the shovel and the rake, and we're going to pop them in here.
Affecting your business or customers?
Have I managed to test crops without affecting our business? I guess I would I would say I use the 20% rule, which is to say 1 in 5 activities on our farm should be crazy, experimental, and new, and 4 out of 5 activities should be tried and true. We know it's going to work. And so we have steady accounts that order a very consistent amount from us on a weekly basis. And so we're going to direct seed on a timed schedule, make sure we have those crops available to them. And then I leave about 1/5 of our varieties and activities as experimental to keep it interesting for me and for others on the farm too. And so we're actually in the experimental zone here. I've never done those 10-inch chains just came out. I've never actually done a transplant with a 10-inch chain. And so this will affect our customers in that they may get some nice winter boar kale over the winter, or they may not. We'll see.
I was wondering how 265, 264,000.
Okay, I got Nitten sent these chains directly to me, and John, maybe you can answer the question. Are they yet available on your website, and where can people get the 10-inch chains, and how many cells are in here? I'm not sure. There's somewhere less than 264. Uh-huh. So the question is, how do we do our irrigation in here? And in the winter with the low light levels that we have, we prefer to do just overhead irrigation. And I wonder, Adiana, if you would be able to bring us one of the irrigation risers, and I can show folks what that looks like. And we use Orbits, a wobbler head risers in here, and we'll put them. We actually won't. We'll only run irrigation maybe 1 or 2 times a month from late October through till about March. So Adiana is going to show you what these look like here. Just we're just going to hook a garden hose up to here, and there's a wobbler head. And 17 years have not failed me once, so that's a good investment. And I should say those are Orbit's spike step-in bases. You can buy those on Amazon. And I forget your second question. Okay, we do have circulation fans in here. In the wintertime, we do not use them. We only use them when the tomatoes are in here. And do we heat? The last 3 winters, the answer is no. We haven't heated in the winter for the winter greens. And the reason is it's just a cost issue actually. And we sell a spring mix all season, all year. And that's what we're growing in the winter here. But if we can put a lot of Mizuna and spinach and cold hardy Asian greens in that spring mix. We found that those crops can take the winter here without heat and actually without row cover too, except along the edge of the greenhouse. I do have heaters in here. If we would get negative double digits, I would probably turn them on and get us back up into the single digits for an emergency situation, which hasn't happened the last couple of winters.
Two comments from John. He has
Mhm.
customers who sent videos of kids pulling the transplanter, so it's
Mhm.
not hard to do. And
Okay.
he'll have the longer chains on his website for sale this fall or winter.
Okay, so the longer chains are coming. You can check out smallfarmworks.com. John's going to put them up they'll be available later this fall or winter. And he wanted to note that kids can use this tool, and that's true. I've got an 8 and 10-year-old; they love to use the tool, and even 3-year-olds when the boys were younger, they were pushing at this little handle here, and so it can be a good father-son bonding time. Okay, should we try this 10-inch chain? Okay, so another correction is that we're at just under 12 inches and not 10 inches. So it would be 30 centimeters, I guess, would be the most accurate spacing way to talk about it. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and pull this chain. I'm going to quit about 10 minutes before the hour, and I want to open it up to have just open up for questions. So if you have any other burning questions, we will have time. So here's that 30 centimeters, just under 12 inch. And this is about perfect for the bok choy to get nice big bok choy heads. So there's an add-on device that comes with for use with these longer chains to prevent them from twisting. And I don't see a lot of twisting actually as I'm doing this. These 2-week transplants are fairly young. Like I said, I do have some older transplants too. But they're going in the ground fine. And Adiana is going along behind and doing some tucking in too. And one thing I like about the different spacing options is you don't have to have row markers. You don't have to mark that out. The spacing is taken care of for you by the tool. So there you have it. I'll come back around this other direction so you can, oops, banging in the tomatoes. And I will note that we just took out tomato plants from here. This ground is not perfect. And you can see all these gangly roots from our fig trees. But the tool really slices through ground that is pretty imperfect. And you'll note we have wet transplants. I bottom watered these transplants this afternoon, and the soil is moist. So again, these are about 2-week old Joy Choi Bok Choys going in at a slightly less than 12-inch spacing with this new chain. And there are a couple misses in here, a couple seeds not germinate. So nearly 100% germination, but a few didn't, and that's fine. And in that case, what we like to do is we'll just go back along and just tuck some in by hand where needed.
Can you talk about your top winter crops that have done well in the greenhouse? And do you grow, what lettuces do you grow?
So the question is, what are the top winter crops in the greenhouse, and what lettuces do we like to grow? Um, my top all around lettuce, and probably what we sell most of on our farm, is intercut. And Johnny's Selected Seeds sells intercut lettuce. It's a multi-leaf head lettuce, or we use it like a multi-leaf head lettuce, meaning we get lots of cuts, usually 4 or 5 cuts from each planting. I use the 6-inch chain, but I'm actually, now that I see this 11 or 12-inch option, I'm going to switch to this because intercut heads can get huge. And so I'm going to try that on this spacing here, but it does work at 6-inch. And I'll have those rows about 9 inches apart from one another too. And that works all winter in the greenhouse. But uh, I do plant the lettuces in the middle part as part of the greenhouse. I don't put them on the edge where it's colder. Lettuces take a bit more heat. My favorite crop in the winter is spinach. Seaside has done well for a number of years for me. And I like Seaside because it has a nice upright growth habit, and the leaf size stays fairly small. So we can use it in our salad mix, and customers don't have to cut it into pieces. And sometimes our winter spring mix is 50% spinach or more. That's just what's in season. That's what wants to grow in the winter. And it really does best after the equinox. And that's why we call it farming the backside of the calendar. It's really exciting, really fun to do. And if you do any small farming, even at home gardening, plant spinach after the equinox, and you'll be healthier all winter for it, I promise. And then I like to grow Asian greens. Mizuna is my go-to. The green Mizuna and red. There's a couple of red Mizuna options, and those are just super productive throughout the winter. There are a couple of new Asian greens. Green River was one that's newer that has done well for us too that we've been playing around with. Those are my favorites in the winter. Okay, sure. So why don't you go ahead and fire those questions. So a question is, what is the new total chain length of the 12-inch chain? And I'm going to see if John can look that up. Like I said, there's the first time I planted it. I really actually don't have that number in my head. No, I don't. It would be really hard to do. I the question is, do I stagger the rows when I plant? And I don't, because it would just be super hard to do. The chains do unravel in fairly consistent distance apart, but it would be hard to be that precise with it. And I haven't found that to be needed. Question is, what's the closest spacing between rows that can be achieved? I've done as close as 5-inch. And what happens is you'll start to cover the next row with dirt. So I found 8 or 9 inches is a good, comfortable, close spacing, and then you can get a 6-inch hoe between them.
They do better inside than outside kind of
So,
thing.
sure, figs are one of those not paper pot crops. I've never done figs in paper pots, but we grow figs because our family does a ginger fig jam that is just to die for. We fill our pantry with it every October. And so it's just a fun crop. It's one of that 20% experimental crops that is just really fun to do. And it fits well with our system because we have strawberries that will grow underneath the figs in the early season. And then by winter for winter crops, the leaves, usually by October, the leaves start to die off. We have a pomegranate bush here, and if you look close, you can see a couple of ripe pomegranates on there. We've grown a banana tree in here. It lasted one season, and have not done kiwi or avocado. I do have friends in southern Indiana, about 4 hours south of us. We're in the very northern part of Indiana here that have done both of those. Okay. I am a big fan of Birkenstocks because you want your feet to have. Oh, the question is, what kind of shoes am I wearing? I'm wearing Birkenstocks, Birkies, I think they're called. I'm not sure, but they are waterproof and they're just sort of my go-to. And we work from home, and I can just kick them on and off and get in the house and not get yelled at because there's dirt tracking around the house. Do I prefer shoes to boots? It depends. Those who work here will tell you that I'm constantly changing the footwear that I'm wearing because in the morning you want something like a muck boot. I wear something like a muck boot to if the dew is really heavy and walking around doing the harvest. But then in the afternoon, I just like to use lightweight tennis shoes. Um, and Ultras are my favorite. I like the wide toe box that Ultras have. Um, and the Ultra Lone Peak, to get very specific, has the fastest drying time of any shoe that I've ever worn. And so I'm constantly getting my feet wet, and so that's important to me. The greens harvester is the farmer's friend, greens harvester with a handle extension, so that we're holding it up here instead of bending over to use it.
Wants to know what's your biggest initial challenge when implementing the paper pot system on your farm?
So Jackson, I'm glad you asked that. Jackson's asking what's my biggest initial challenge with implementing the paper pot system on our farm. And I would say it's probably transplant handling. And that's still a challenge for me to have healthy transplants that are in such tiny cells. And because you can water these guys too much and they dry out super quick. And so really honing in my skills with transplants and moving to the bottom watering system was super key for me. I use bottom watering trays. Um, let's see, I believe Bootstrap, don't quote me on this, I believe Bootstrap Farmer, Modern Farmer, I think has them too. A couple places you can get them that are designed for this paper pot system. Actually, I've got one here. This tray, in fact, is still soaking. And you can see I'll put just half an inch of water underneath and soak these guys up. But then you don't want to let them sit in water, of course, just like get them nice and wet for a day and then pull them off the trays. And I found that I've had the best luck with that versus overhead.
Got 7 minutes. Question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you use cover crops in your no-till system? Is bed prep after cover crops challenging using paper pot?
Is do we use cover crops? And is bed prep a challenge um, after cover crops? So the answer is no, we don't actually use cover crops other than our crop we consider that a cover crop. And so if we were out in the field, and Nadiana can tell you we spent all morning doing this, when crops are finished, we simply pull a tarp over top of them. And we've cut tarps. You see our beds are 35 feet in length here, and they're 1 meter in width, 42 inch. So we cut tarps that are slightly larger, about 6 feet in width and maybe 36 feet or so in length. And we'll simply cover these small beds as they're finished. And so when spinach or lettuce, bok choy even, when these crops are done, they're smothered. And that is the cover crop because by smothering, we're leaving the nutrients, right in place. We're not going to pull crops and compost them outside of the garden. We're going to take advantage of the minerals that the old plants are leaving behind.
Potting mix do you recommend with paper pots?
So what potting mix do I recommend with paper pots? I've only used a few, and I can tell you that the Vermont Compost for Light works. And so that's what I've stuck with for the last several years.
Do you use the greens harvester with your paper pot lettuce?
Do we use greens harvested paper pot lettuce? I do. And so these are multi-cut lettuces here that we'll paper pot in. And once they're about 6 or 8 inches in height, we consider it like hedge trimming. We'll just cut the top 2 or 3 inches off of each head. And then by the next week, they'll grow again, and we'll get another harvest.
Questions? Do you
Mhm.
put the seeds under grow lights or just out in greenhouse?
The question is, do we do seedlings under grow lights or out in the greenhouse? It depends on the time of year. In the summer when it's hot and we're trying to grow lettuce, trying to get lettuce to come up and spinach, I'll put them in our cool germination chamber set at 68 Fahrenheit and then pull them out either onto wet cement or sometimes we can run grow lights and I have the processing room on our farm, we have air conditioning in there and we can grow good transplants in the summer as long as we crank the air conditioning.
Maximum number of trays you can have in production at a time.
The maximum number of trays, well, I should back up and finish the last question. Sometimes we actually we have a propagation house that's attached to our processing room. The Lean Microfarm book, I want to plug it here. I talk in detail how to set up all this infrastructure. It's really critical for farming to set your infrastructure up properly, even on a micro farm. But having a nice, well ventilated and heated propagation house that's ideally attached to a building has been the ticket for me. Okay, and you said
The
there's another
maximum
question.
number of trays in production at one time.
The maximum number of trays in production at one time, I would 20 to 30 in that neighborhood. If we get too many trays of seedlings in them, then that kind of bogs down our farm. Like I said, I'd rather hygiene is the lean term, but we want to spread our work out like a paper chain or like an accordion, so that every week we have a fairly consistent amount of work to do.
The shortest bed length that would work with paper pot.
The shortest bed length that would work, I would think, I mean, 30 feet or so is probably about as short as I would want to go. If you have beds that are really short, 10 or 12 feet in length, then I think you're going to be pulling up the transplanter and turning around, and that would get annoying.
Soil diseases can happen during the winter growing greenhouse.
Sure. The question is, are there soil diseases that happen in the greenhouse in the winter? And with the greens that we're putting in, we have not seen that be a problem. Okay. Hey, thank you very much. We're at the end of the hour. I really appreciate everyone's attention, all your great questions. And we are going to get the video out to you. Check out claybottomfarm.com website, Masterclass 40% off this month. And you can contact me through that website too with more questions. So thank you again. You all have a good evening. Let's do it again.